Hey everyone, Angelo here, Hollywood filmmaker, greatest screenwriter in the history of the world, recovering homeless guy. I've got my new helmet and new handlebar grips as well. The old ones tore up because my bike kept falling over on the kickstand when I didn't extend it all the way. And I've been car free for 3 years now. No way, 3 years? Yeah, that's right. Hard to believe. Wow, that's really hard to believe. But I was a driver for 2008 or so no 2007 to 2021, 14 years. 14 years I was a driver. I owned three cars. I also drove my dad's car for a while before I owned a car. And being a driver, I got my first car kind of late because, for one thing, I never had much money, but also I just didn't care. Like, I didn't see the need really. I was a little scared of driving, I guess, but it wasn't a big preoccupation for me. I just could get around on the metro, and also I wasn't really doing much in life, and like my jobs were always close by. I went to school close by, so it was never really an issue. And yeah, it was just a huge expense. Eventually, I got a car. It was a real piece of junk. 1995 Mitsubishi Galant. It was a lot of fun to drive. I bought it from my boss when I was working as a bank teller, but I had no idea what I was supposed to look for in a car. That thing was leaking so much oil. I needed to fill it up every week. It was a lot of fun to drive, but it was a mess. And traded it in, overpaid for a 2005 Honda Civic, and this is in 2009 now when I got it. I spent well over $13,000 on that car. Way, way over that. Like, that's just basically what the payments came out to. That's like double that, I would think, with gas, insurance. Um, I had two crashes, I think, with it. Oh, yeah, like one kind of big one, and then there was the one that destroyed it. So many repairs, blown head gasket, and then when that was when that was destroyed in L.A. In October 2019, I was very lucky to get a Toyota Camry, a 2000 Camry for very low price, $2,300 from just a decent guy who was a mechanic who kept it in perfect shape. I took it to two mechanics to check out. There was a kind of a big problem. The first mechanic said it was going to cost a lot to fix, but the guy who owned the car, he's like, "No, don't worry, I'll do it." And he took care of it for like 20 bucks, but he didn't even charge me. So the thing was basically a steal. And then, as is typical for drivers in LA, they learned that their cars keep getting destroyed. So 2 years after that, in October 2021, that car was destroyed. Both were destroyed in the same way. They were parked on the side of the road, and somebody crashed into them overnight. That doesn't look great on camera. I wanted, whatever. I wanted the visual of my bike back here. And I wanted to buy a car. I planned on it. I got the insurance payout, which was more like almost double what I paid for the car. And trying to find a used car was from a private seller was incredibly difficult for the price I wanted, for a low price, because all the cars I could find that were like reliable, like old Toyotas or Hondas. There are a few other ones I was considering, like somebody told me like a Pontiac something, a Vibe, I think. It was actually a Toyota, just in a Pontiac body. And if I could find one cheap, I would have done it. And if it passed, like a mechanic's inspection, but I couldn't find anything. This was again October 2021, so in the midst somewhat earlier days of the pandemic, and used car prices were going up, and the only cars I could find were like in the price range I wanted, like around 2,000, maybe $3,000, were basically bogus. They were being sold by dealers, but who were just selling as if they were private sellers on Craigslist, and I could almost always tell they were dealers. So in other words, they didn't own the car, they didn't maintain it. I don't know what shape it's in. I messaged people asking for cars. Nobody would even respond. Well, almost nobody responded when I asked, "Can I look at it? Can I test drive it?" One person said, "Yeah, after you pay for it." So, yeah, like what the? What kind of answer is that? This is the part of the gears of capitalism that turn as far as like your life depends on making money, and therefore so much of our life and so much of advertising is here's how you can make money selling timeshares and getting into real estate and selling audiobooks and having AI automatically make money for you. Like so much of advertising, I realized, and I'm getting there as far as how I went from having cars to car free, getting through my stutters and all, is how much money I saved not having a car. And seeing like there are literally ads because people are so desperate and broke. Like they just are ads for you to supposedly make money, but it's not true. It's a way for them to make money. And it's because we have a system that impoverishes people. But anyways, I just kind of put off getting a car. I didn't plan on not never getting a car. And I started taking the bus to work, and I realized the bus was free. And because this was still during the earlier days of the pandemic, LA made the buses free. And so for like 3 months, I took the bus to work, and not always taking the bus home because it was much more unreliable coming back. So a lot of times I would just walk the 3 miles home and walk along the bus route. Sometimes I caught the bus somewhere along the route. Sometimes I never saw it, and sometimes I was not at the bus stop when the bus went by, and I was like, well, can't catch that one. And by the time the fares went back in place, I was like, well, if I'm gonna pay for the bus, like I'm not gonna. Well, I don't want to pay for the bus if it's not going to show up. So I went and got a bike. Excuse me. And I was nervous at first, like, oh, what's riding a bike going to be like in LA? And also, like, kind of wondered how good I'll be at it again. Of course, I just knew instinctively how to do it from when I was a kid. And test rode a few, and then got the one behind me, and uh, immediately loved it. It was so much fun. I wasn't great at little things that I didn't know, like have the seat higher. But when you start out, like you just don't know. You go by what you're comfortable with. So I didn't want the seat higher. My legs were much weaker than I thought they were, even though I was doing lots of squats and burpees. And my legs were nowhere in the shape that I thought they were. So that riding the 3 miles to work on pretty much level streets was difficult. And it took a while to where I could do it somewhat easily, like several months. And also, I didn't bother learning how to ride with one hand, so I lost control of my bike trying to brake and turn, and fell and cracked my ribs once because I was nervous about a car behind me that I thought was going to get impatient with me. And then the driver stopped, the passenger got out to help me, and anyways, I rode my bike home, but I was hurting. And uh, I kept my operator's insurance, which meant that I still had insurance for like if I drove anyone else's car, or if I test drove a car, although I guess you're covered by the dealer in that case. Just so I had like some insurance in case, or if I buy a car again, because and the price goes way down when you just have like operators, like non-owners insurance. It was like $50 a month as opposed to like 120 I was paying, and that's pretty low for LA. Lots of people pay $300 or $400 a month, or way more than that, for their cars in LA. And what I realized after about a year was I don't plan on buying a car. I love riding a bike, so I canceled that. And I've gotten in such great shape. It's helped me so much mentally, physically, so much. Like I didn't realize I lost like 15 or 20 pounds riding my bike until I started weighing myself. I assumed I was still around my old weight of like 180 pounds. I always hovered around there, and it turned out I was 165, and I wasn't even like managing my meals well. I didn't even understand how to quite to eat right. And more time passed by. I started the other. Well, let me back up. The other part of this, I had been getting interested in urbanism for a while, like around 2014 or 15 or so, when Tesla was getting popular. I thought, oh, this is amazing. Elon Musk is going to revolutionize cars. He's going to make it so much better for the environment. And someday I'll own one. And that's my dream, is just have your own car, like, but a super powered, like very safe car to be inside of, not necessarily to be outside of. And uh, being on in leftist spaces online, I would hear stuff that like I was already very much latent conservative, like getting into progressive ideas, but there was a lot of still these chauvinistic or just things I took for granted. It like parts of me, this inertia that I was unchallenged, and then I would see ideas challenged, like whenever people talked about gun control and mocking it by comparing it to cars and say, well, cars kill more people a year, but nobody's calling for banning them. And I would see people say, oh, yes, we are. And now, to be clear, people get confused by that, thinking, oh, you're saying ban cars everywhere? They were, well, it's a facetious thing to say, like banning cars everywhere. But banning cars, yes, in the sense that just the narrow definition of that, like banning cars, technically cars are banned from my house or my apartment. They're banned from certain spaces. So yes, banning cars, but that's not the same as banning all cars. Although like it's provocative to say that, and it's good because it got people like me thinking, like, oh wow, like there are people like, yeah, cars are a big problem, but and it's not like I was some great like caring advocate thinking, what do we do about this? I just liked being challenged on what I thought, and I liked finding out where I was wrong, and I would try and prove myself wrong on stuff. Not saying I'm always right then, and that I know everything. I always have stuff to learn. I always have so much to learn. I'm always ignorant about things. But how much more so I was when I wasn't aware of this stuff. And one thing that always stuck out in my mind over the years to this day was somebody posting that every parking lot is a complete failure of design or something like that. It was a complete failure of urban design. And I liked that idea. I was like, yeah, parking lots take up so much space, but if you don't have them, how are you going to park your car there? Like, I wasn't like, I didn't respond or fight. I don't think I did. And I definitely wasn't like fighting them over it. I just wondered, like, what do you do without a parking lot? I thought you must have parking garages, right? I didn't realize that this is the American mindset. For so many of us Americans, we literally just can't conceive of a world where cars aren't normal to get you around. And people around the world know that. No, people who have good transit where you live know that for us, like it's so unusual to think about just getting around on public transportation and it being good and quality. So I enjoyed seeing stuff like that. And then I saw arguments like breaking down why Elon Musk's idea of a hyperloop wouldn't work to alleviate traffic and was in fact a horrible idea and is a horrible idea, and how much superior trains are at getting people around. And I remember like grudgingly accepting that idea. Like I remember getting a little discussion with a friend who said something about like he thought self-driving cars would help with traffic, and I said I disagree. I've seen stuff on it talking about how they're going to create more traffic, more problems. For self-driving cars to drive alongside with human drivers will be a huge problem because the human drivers can sort of always bully and make the self-driving cars get out of the way, and so it can stop, like slow their progress, stop their progress, alter their routes, because they'll always drive safely, whereas people know they don't have to because the self-driving cars will just yield to them. And many other problems with that too, like where do the self-driving cars go when they're not taking someone around or doing a delivery? Well, like it's cheaper to just have them drive around on free roads than park them somewhere. So in other words, they'd be causing more traffic. And then if a person might make 2 or 3 or 4 trips a day in their one car, they would, if without their own car, they would need to summon cars multiple times a day. That means cars going around all over the region to service them and then to give a ride to somebody else. So that's way more traffic. And I remember telling my friend, I was like, no, I think trains are going to be the way. Like, we got to get more trains. And I remember, I say grudgingly because I didn't really like riding the metro in DC, where I'm from Virginia, but Northern Virginia, DC region, the metro connects all through there. DC, Maryland, Virginia, just the DMV for short. And I just remember thinking, yeah, it's like kind of crummy. Like, the trains get delayed, they're overcrowded. Crowding issues kind of different here in LA because the trains mostly aren't as big. There are 2 like real metro lines, then the rest are like light rail lines. but also not as many people rely on the metro, and there's just so many more people in DC take the metro than here. At least I don't know the total numbers, but like per capita, I think it's got to be higher because the metro in DC just runs faster, services a much greater area, and it's more convenient in a lot of ways than getting around by car, especially in the city of DC, where it's just a nightmare to drive. Like it literally would take me an hour to get 1 mile in DC sometimes in my car. To where I always thought I refused to take public transportation, but sometimes I realized, oh, it's better to take it, and I would take it into DC. And that's kind of what we need to happen, only not just because of a complete logjam on the roads, but because public transportation needs to be as easy, reliable, clean, safe, and affordable. What are the like something like it needs to be comfortable, needs to get you around quickly. If it can do it better than cars, and if we can make it like appropriately difficult to drive cars, meaning um, like narrower streets, more architecture, safer design, and charging more appropriately. Because right now, like we're just giving, like just financing roads and infrastructure, spreading out cities that we don't pay for, and we want people to pay for decades later. That's a whole other thing. Look up the suburbs as a pyramid scheme, and you'll see Strong Towns and Not Just Bikes has done stuff about that. But anyways, so back to me. So I was getting the education side of it and getting more into urbanism and really caring about it. And of course, seeing around me and thinking, oh, like there's plenty of public transportation opportunities around here, and riding a bike is wonderful. It's a joy. I love it. And yet it should be better. And I don't care about me, not just for me, but like, why isn't everyone able to get around easily? Why are there so many traffic deaths, particularly in my old neighborhood of Koreatown, where people still die around my neighborhood in hit and runs, pedestrians? And we're so calloused and numb to it because, again, we think in terms of what's familiar and what we know, and we don't like to challenge what's familiar and what we know. We think, well, those are just accidents, not that these are the function of design. The streets were designed to be deadly, but we think just because somebody didn't like consciously will them to be deadly, therefore they didn't. The streets are deadly because that's the impact of how they're designed, especially certain streets. It's not like randomly dispersed. Certain corridors are deadlier than others. And so I was getting the education side. I was loving riding my bike. When I got laid off from my job in Hollywood, I ended up moving around a few times to the west side of LA, and finally was able to meet up with these bike groups, bike advocates, people at Streets for All, Bike Culver City, whose shirt I'm wearing, One Less Car. And that's a great way to think of it. You're one less car. You want less traffic? Don't be traffic. People think that when it comes to like discussing like sharing the road with bikes or just giving bike infrastructure, you don't have to share the road if they're not on the road. It's amazing how quickly drivers seem to get solidarity just because of what their eyes are taking in, what's familiar. Those other cars, those are like my car. Those other people are like me. That's normal. You're doing something that's not normal, therefore it's like seditious practically. It challenges them, it provokes them. And to what I say to those chauvinists and conservatives especially, although it encompasses liberals too, believe me, a lot of liberals, basically just the conservative with a smile. Like liberal is like, will give some acknowledgement to civil rights and racism, and we'll put up Black Lives Matter stickers around, a little more than that, or like we'll give some social programs funding, but it's going to be extremely strenuous and humiliating and painful to try and get that funding for yourself, for welfare, food stamps, whatever the case. Anyways, what was I talking about? Be careful, conservatives, because one day you might end up like me. If you're provoked and challenged by this stuff, it may get under your skin, and you may start thinking about it and looking into it and learning about how our cities were designed and how these were all willful decisions to not build public transportation, to defund public transportation, and to build out freeways and wide boulevards for cars to subsidize the car industry. It's a big welfare handout for them. They don't have to pay for it. Amazon doesn't pay for the roads with all the delivery trucks they have. Uh, Other big companies that are big online shippers like Walmart or whoever else, I don't even know. I mean, I'm sure I can name a bunch, especially from when I worked at a warehouse. A lot of like the Blue Apron companies like that, they're not paying, and just the companies themselves that ship. I worked at this just shithole company, On Track, which has terrible reviews online, and all I can say is experience in the warehouse reflects the kind of experience the customers get. And they're not paying for it. It's essentially something we trick ourselves into thinking is free and then whine that cyclists aren't paying road tax. You're kind of fudging a lot of numbers right there, because who pays for the gas you get, the oil? It's not exactly you. It's heavily subsidized by the government by hundreds of billions of dollars a year. And who pays for the effects of the car industry? The 42,000 people a year who die from car crashes in America. We are outliers in much of the world in traffic deaths. The people who are poisoned through the metals and toxins emitted by tailpipes, by brake pads, and whose soil is poisoned from the microplastics from tires. Our oceans are poisoned by them, and water supply. We have higher rates of neurological disease from these emissions, from cardiovascular disease, lung disease like childhood asthma, lung cancer, emphysema from all this. Who pays for that? Oh, well, you don't see that out the front of your dashboard, so why would you think about it? So there, again, the education part, but being able, I remember, I think it was the first group bike ride I did was after I got laid off, like 2 days afterwards, and I finally had time to go to one of these bike group meetups. I immediately made friends with people there, and I loved riding with them. Also going to Ciclavia several times, which is a huge open streets event that happens in LA every 2 weeks or 2 months or so. I wish it was every 2 weeks. And it's like usually like 5 to 7 miles of open streets, different sections of LA, and thousands of cyclists, pedestrians, skateboarders, people in wheelchairs and other mobility devices like scooters go through there. It's like a huge party on the street, and it shows you what happens when you take cars off the street, which is people fill them in, and we have this joyous street for ourselves, and we don't have to look behind us. I remember the first time I did a Ciclavia, I felt so weird, like, do I have to look behind me for a car? And thinking it's so weird that parents are pushing their babies in their strollers down huge boulevards, and realizing, oh, this is amazing. Like, they feel safe here because people will go around them. Whereas drivers pose a much greater threat to people on the road than than people in active mobility. Cyclists, also rollerbladers. I've since become a rollerblader as well, still getting better at it. That has been a whole other journey that's just been absolutely amazing, and I love it, and it's so healthy, and it's helped me so much. And I'm like, my goodness, why didn't I know about this stuff earlier? This is like a new dream I didn't know I could have. I came to LA for my film dream, and I'm still pursuing that and involved in that every day. But this is a different dream that's like also good. This is a different dream that's also something like, it's amazing. I didn't know how much there could be to this, and all the like new experiences I'm having and people I keep meeting. And I'm like, this is amazing. Like, how do I deserve this? Like, this is incredible, but we need more of this. Because you look at how other countries have more people-friendly streets, how they have wider sidewalks, much more public transportation, and drivers are used to sharing the road with cyclists. They have denser lane use, so they didn't do what we did necessarily, build out suburbs so far from the job centers, because after World War II especially, lots of suburbs were built, these developments where white people were financed to go out and buy these homes, and it was great for them. They could build up their middle class But black and brown people were largely banned from these spaces, from developing wealth. They stayed in the inner cities that the whites moved from, and the inner cities were disinvested in. The whites could move out to these suburbs further and further away from the inner cities. And how would they make these long commutes? By car and on freeways that had to be built. And so you look up a website like Segregation by Design, you'll see the before and after of how these freeways flattened thousands and thousands of homes of lower income people, disproportionately black and brown, because they didn't have the political capital to fight it. And they're the ones suffering with not only just the lower property values, which white suburban homeowners love to keep up. Like, they don't want any affordable housing in their neighborhood, even if they say they support affordable housing, because racism. They don't want black and brown people moving in around them. And they want the law to make sure they stay rich. How insane is that? And it means less generational wealth to be passed down from black families and brown families, but also they're living by these freeways now, and they have to have, they're the ones dealing with so much of the health effects from leaded gasoline over the years, even though that's been phased out. Still, the emissions from cars that cause childhood asthma, disproportionately high rates in areas around freeways where kids go to school or where kids live. And the streets are much more hostile to pedestrians, because then you need, when you have a freeway, you can't just have it funneling into small streets. You need wider roads, you need a lot more parking lots. We give up more land that's no longer productive because it just sits there as a huge parking lot. And so it's this cyclical feedback system that tells you you need a car to get around, and you can only get around by driving a car, which is the same thing. But then you need a car to drive to work, you need your job to pay for your car. And so what are people going to think in that system? They're going to think, well, I'm stuck in my home until I can get a car. Therefore, cars equal liberation and freedom. So why are you complaining about cars now? Well, it takes some scaling out and looking at the history of this, and looking at people's actual experiences and seeing how senseless the deaths are from it. So for one thing, biking is a joy. It doesn't mean anyone in particular should or has to bike. I think it's great if you can. It's absolutely wonderful. And then the skateboard, I barely get out. I'd like to. Rollerblades, I absolutely love, getting better at that. And it's a symptom of a much larger problem of how work keeps us ground down, and we don't have universal health care in this country. So who pays for all the maimings and injuries and lost wages and all this stuff from people who are hurt in car crashes? Well, it's not really the drivers. It's just spread out among people who are atomized and have to patchwork together a way of getting through time lost from work because you're in a car crash. Not being able to get around somehow without your own car often means borrowing a car, renting a car. Not being able to rely on public transportation, because everyone relies on a car in this country, or most people, or so many people do, I should say. Licensing standards for driving are much lower than in other countries, where they're much higher, and the fines and penalties are much steeper for violations. So therefore, drivers are a lot safer. But it's not just because of that. It's because of the architecture. The streets are more narrow. You can live closer to where you work, where you shop. You don't need a car to get around. So the people who drive tend to be the people more who want to drive, and not because they have to. Because when you have a system where people have to drive to get around, people are driving who should not be driving, who are not safe to drive. Meaning they're too angry, they're impatient, they're distracted, they have health conditions, they're of a certain age where their cognitive abilities mean driving isn't safe for them. Like my dad, who was in his 80s and still driving, and I didn't even think then, well, what's the alternative? But it was horrible. He crashed several cars, and fortunately he came through unscathed, and other people came through unscathed, but he flipped someone's car over. And he didn't have like remorse or anything. Think about it like that. He had a temper problem too with driving, and I'm not saying that in that case it was attributable to that, but he didn't really reflect on why he shouldn't be driving. And then again, he was working into his 80s. Like he needed to be able to get around, and it's such an indignity and an insult to our seniors that we don't provide good public transportation. And instead, what we do in this country is treat public transportation largely like punishment for being poor, because that's what it's relegated to. It's mostly lower income people. It's like just there as a piece of a patchwork system, just temporarily until you can afford a car, whether you should be able to get a car or not. Uh, People who shouldn't be driving, it's not a good idea. If you're drunk, if you're high, why do we have so many drunk driving deaths in this country? People should be advocating for transit and bars that are closer to where you live so that you can get to a bar and leave without driving. And people immediately, like, that sounds unfamiliar. It sounds scary. Well, I used to work at a neighborhood bar. It's a lot better than having another bar I worked at where you're just out on the highway and there's a huge parking lot out in front. And like only once or twice we had to really try and stop someone from driving drunk and leaving, because the bar's got to be responsible for how they serve. They could get in big trouble if they don't. And as far as over serving people, but why is that even there? That's so preposterous. So we're paying billions and billions for a system that kills us, whereas we could be paying still billions, but for a system that doesn't just get you around because you're driving a car, or me around because I'm driving a car. It gets everybody around, because I don't want to just do well for myself. I want everyone to be able to do well, because it makes no sense to me why people, you see them hunched over on the street, exhausted, tired. I know they're often working two jobs and they're driving cars that aren't reliable, and if they have a car at all, and if they bike, they don't have safe bike corridors, and you tend to see those in the more bike deaths in, again, lower income communities of color, where you have the wider streets, more freeways, and less amenities for pedestrians and cyclists. The inner cities have been disinvested in, even though they're the tax base, because when you have denser development, that's less cost to run utilities, road repairs, things like garbage pickup. If you do it for a building with a bunch of families in it, that costs less than having to do it for a neighborhood of single family homes. So anyways, those are my thoughts on how I became homeless. Sorry, I used to be homeless. How I became car free and loved it. It's partly the joy of active mobility and saving. So I've saved easily like tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, if I had bought a reasonably newish car or recent model car. And the health benefits are enormous, and the community I've made. I ran into a friend today at the farmer's market from a cycling group, because first of all, it was great because it's an open street. They close down the street and you can just be there without a car, or no cars are allowed there, so you actually have people out and you can have some solidarity with people. They're not competition for you like at red light when you're in a car, but they're community. You're in communion with each other, and that's what I noticed at Ciclavia. I could be at a red light with 50 cyclists and I'll still get through it. You get to a red light with 4 drivers in front of you, it's possible one of them is distracted and you won't get through, or the intersection's blocked. It's easy to look at the drivers and think of them as competition, whereas once you start thinking, oh, but cyclists are different from us, now all of a sudden you're in solidarity with other drivers. No, you're not. Like, drivers don't like other drivers. They could complain about other drivers all day. They sit around and watch like bad driver compilations and complain in the comments, like they're being morally upstanding here, where they don't even consider the alternative for how we can design our cities. And finally, employers love it if you're constantly broke, because you're paying a lot for a car, among other things. They like it if rents are high, They like it if your car is expensive. Why? Because you clearly value those things more than you value. Well, you value those things a lot, so you fear losing those things a lot. And why would you lose those things? And your health care, if you have health care and health insurance that works, uh, because you speak up against abuse at work. You get mistreated. You get your wages stolen by your employer. Conditions are unsafe at work. So those bums at OnTrack could do all kinds of crappy stuff, and just the casual day-to-day humiliation and degrading treatment of underpaying people who are working incredibly hard at 2 or 3 in the morning, sometimes 7 days a week, who are working homeless like I was at the time. And they know that people fear losing their job because that's how you survive. We don't have guaranteed housing, we don't have social safety nets, we don't have covered medical care for people, we don't have quality food support. We basically say, screw you, like I got mine if you get a good job. And therefore, it makes it like everyone's afraid of losing their job and everyone's afraid of speaking up against abuse. So it's much easier to be an abusive employer than if people could say, hey, screw you, I don't need to take this. And they could leave if they wanted. At the very least, it should be where that doesn't happen in the first place. And if it does, it should be where you can speak up and they know, oh, we're not going to be able to just fire them. Or we know people are going to speak up because if they lose their job, it's not going to be catastrophic for their lives. But also, if people speak up, even if we fire them in retaliation, um, people we're not going to have this huge pool of desperate people willing to take the job for less money now, because people's needs are met. And one way we can just help do that for ourselves is get one of these. Ride a bike instead of driving a car. Help your health out. It doesn't cure everything for health. I'm not saying it does, but help your health out if you can. You don't have to go car free. Go car light. Certain days, just ride a bike, walk, take the bus, take the metro, if that's an option. Save money when you can, because what you'll find is you love it. So anyways, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye.